Cleopatra, the beautiful and intelligent queen who changed history. Beauty, wit, and charisma, the many facets of Cleopatra's reign. The movie begins in a post-Civil War setting where Caesar stands on the grounds of Pharsalia, after destroying the land of Lord Pompey. Caesar had invaded Rome, and now was the new conqueror leader. Canidius informs Caesar that Pompey has escaped to Egypt for shelter. Caesar decides to leave for Egypt to acquire wheat amidst the political argument there between the two siblings, Cleopatra and Ptolemy. He leaves his duties to Mark Antony. Ptolemy refused to share the throne with his sister Cleopatra, and attempted to murder her, which drove her away from Alexandria. Caesar arrives in Egypt and goes straight to the royal castle, after passing the city's busy streets. He meets King Ptolemy and lets him know about his Egypt expedition, which mainly revolved around resolving the differences between the two siblings. There King Ptolemy offers him a gift, Pompey's ring, and his severed head. This surprises Caesar, and he is then escorted to his room. Later, Caesar is busy in a meeting with commanders when a messenger comes in and informs him about a gift from Queen Cleopatra. The room is evacuated and Apollodorus, Cleopatra's guard, comes in carrying a huge rug. He says it's a gift from the queen. The guard keeps the rug on the ground and flips it. Caesar, who is suspicious, unrolls the rug, and Cleopatra herself comes out of it, rolling on the floor. Caesar finds this fascinating, and gets allured by her beauty and charisma. Cleopatra greets Caesar and warns him about the threats he possesses in the castle. She suggests making a deal with him in which she will protect him, and in return, he will help her become the sole ruler of Egypt over her brother Ptolemy. She offers him the land's gold, treasure, and wheat if she is given the throne of Egypt. The two then discuss the brutal massacre of Pompey, where we find out that Caesar's late daughter was a lover of Pompey, and was bearing his child. Later we see Cleopatra sneaking on Caesar from a hidden room. The men discuss Cleopatra's high intellect but secretive, manipulative, and untrustworthy nature. She then sees Caesar getting some kind of epileptic attack. Cleopatra watches the whole scene as Flavius comes rushing in and helps Caesar. The scene cuts to Cleopatra enjoying music and a dramatic play when she is interrupted by Caesar's arrival. She quickly changes into a bathrobe to seduce him. Caesar invades her personal space while she takes a bath with handmaidens by her side. The two discuss the possible attack of Achilles on the royal palace. While Cleopatra worries, Caesar remains calm. Later Caesar is informed that the Egyptian army has been gearing up for a battle, so Caesar commands his men to secretly burn the harbor, which would possibly cause an outfire everywhere. The next scene cuts to Cleopatra studying epilepsy when she is told that the Romans have burned the harbor, and the great library of Alexandria has caught fire, containing valuable information. The infuriated Cleopatra runs to Caesar to confront him. She shows aggression towards him for his actions that had led to a big fire in the library. The two get into a fight as Cleopatra insults him for his brutal actions. Caesar, however, imposes his dominance on her, and they kiss out of angst mixed with sexual attraction. The intimate moment is interrupted by a guard who informs that the palace has been attacked. Meanwhile, a war starts at the outskirts of the palace where the Romans and Egyptian army battle. Caesar calmly hides underground till dawn, and waits for the battle to end. On the other hand, Pothinus tries to kill Cleopatra by poisoning her drink. Fortunately, she is saved and survives the murder attempt. A court session is held with all the members of the Senate, including Pothinus, Ptolemy, Caesar, and Cleopatra. Caesar charges Pothinus for inciting a war against the Roman army and plotting murder against Cleopatra, giving him the death penalty. Caesar also removes Ptolemy from Rome's custody and sends him off to the camp of General Achilles to fight. Caesar and Cleopatra are left alone in the room as they discuss the war and her being elected as the undisputed queen of Egypt. Caesar suddenly starts getting sick, but Cleopatra insists on helping him and healing him. The next day, Cleopatra is crowned as the Queen of Egypt in the coronation ceremony while everyone bows to her. Later, while sharing a private moment, Caesar tells Cleopatra that he must return to Rome, which he has given under the hands of his trusted man Mark Antony. Cleopatra then offers him to bear his children, a son for an heir. Later they both visit the tomb of Alexander, and Cleopatra offers him to continue the legacy of Alexander. She insists he carries his dreams of uniting the whole world as one, and that it can be achieved with the combined efforts of Egypt and Rome. The scene skips to Rome, where Calpurnia, Caesar's wife, is informed that her husband has married Cleopatra. Caesar is declared an Egyptian god, and Cleopatra gets pregnant with Caesar's child. The son is named Caesarion, and is declared a future ruler of Rome. Caesar prepares to leave for Rome, leaving behind Cleopatra and his son. 3 years later, a ceremony is held for Caesar's dictatorship in Rome as Cleopatra makes a grand, magnificent entry there, with dances and massive statues. Cleopatra arrives with her son, covered in all gold, cheered by everyone. Caesar plays with his son and teaches him to be a noble leader. Caesar then holds a meeting with the people of the Senate and asks them to be made the emperor, but the idea resents them. Later, the Senate members ask Brutus, Caesar's relatively unpopular son, to defeat him and take over Rome. Caesar is then asked by Antony and Cleopatra to be the king of Rome, and slowly take over the whole peninsula like how Alexander dreamed. Later, a dead body is thrown into the palace to threaten Caesar and Cleopatra. On the other hand, the members of the Senate plot Caesar's murder. Caesar is brutally murdered and stabbed by all the members of the Senate on his coronation. The murderers escape from the city. Everyone in Rome mourns the death of Caesar. Cleopatra plans to leave Rome after discovering that Caesar's nephew Octavian has been announced as his new heir under the will. However, Antony tells Cleopatra that there is still hope for Caesarion to be the next king of Rome. 2 years later, Caesar's murderers, including Cassius and Brutus, are caught and killed. Cleopatra honors her late husband in Egypt 3 years after Caesar's death. On the other hand, Rufio tells Antony about the growing financial crisis and suggests he meet Cleopatra and ask for financial help. Antony denies it and sends Rufio to invite her to Tarsus. Rufio visits Egypt and meets the queen with the invite. However, Cleopatra rejects the proposal and insists that Antony must meet her on Egyptian soil. Later, Cleopatra is seen arriving on a big ship on the seas between Alexandria and Tarsus despite her former rejection. Cleopatra, however, strands her ship at the harbor right before the border of Tarsus and commands that Antony should visit her in her ship. Cleopatra saves her pride by still being in the territory of Egypt. Antony enters the ship of Cleopatra, where a feast is being held. Cleopatra welcomes him, wearing a gold necklace with coins of Caesar to always remember him. A grand ceremony is held for Antony's arrival. Cleopatra tells Antony that she is here for a night, but Antony asks her to stay. Later in a ceremony, Antony gets jealous when he sees Caesar and Cleopatra dancing together. However, the couple was not them but some actors. His jealousy revealed his secret love for Cleopatra. After the feast, Antony, in his drunken state, visits Cleopatra in her bed and confesses how he feels. They both give in to their emotions and make love to each other. Later at a Senate meeting, Antony and Cleopatra's affair is discussed, and Germanicus and Octavian get into a slight argument over the Roman throne. Cleopatra shares an intimate moment with Antony, who promises her security and love. Antony prepares to leave for Rome. On the other hand, Octavian and Octavia discuss Antony's absence. A few months later, in Egypt, Cleopatra is given the news that after the alliance with Octavian, Antony has been given more regions to rule, and has successfully united Egypt and Rome. This makes her happy. But she also finds out that the alliance between the two has been made on a marital contract between Antony and Octavian's sister Octavia. This breaks her heart, and she goes crazy, tearing things apart and crying over the heartbreak. Rufio informs Antony that he needs to get a treaty signed with Egypt to achieve financial help, but Antony hesitates out of guilt to face Cleopatra again. Antony visits Cleopatra and demands to have a session alone, deprived of the audience, but the angry and hurt Cleopatra refuses his request and asks him to speak before her in front of everyone. She then asks him to kneel before her, to which he hesitantly agrees. Cleopatra then puts forward her points for the treaty, but Antony denies them. The two then talk privately as Cleopatra shows her resentment at the idea of Antony marrying Octavia after professing his love for her. Antony tries justifying that he was forced to do so for politics, but Cleopatra keeps on insulting him. He continues to beg for her love, so she demands a few terms. She asks him to marry her under Egyptian customs, declares Caesar's son Caesarion as the heir to the throne, and gives 1/3 of the territories under Egyptian rule. Antony agrees. This ensures a war and chaos is then the Roman Senate as Antony divorces Octavia. At the Roman Senate, the members try to defend Antony, justifying his utter love, devotion, and loyalty to Rome. Furious Octavian, however, reads out Antony's will and defies the whole idea. The will says that Antony wishes to be buried in Alexandria instead of Rome, right next to Cleopatra. This further aggravates the Senate. They declare war against Egypt. Octavian sends an army to defeat Antony in Greece, where the couple were staying. Antony prepares for the battle beforehand and leaves for an expedition on his ship with many troops. As the different ships reside on the seas, Antony fires ballistas on the Octavian ship. Antony destroys Octavian's boat to find Octavian. Meanwhile, Cleopatra waits on her ship and keeps getting updates on the war. The men inform her that Antony's ship has been destroyed. Cleopatra assumes that Antony has died. Cleopatra wishes to return to Egypt as the war continues. Antony, however, flees away safely from his attacked ship on a small boat. Cleopatra thinks of Antony as dead, but she is surprised to see him arriving in Egypt. Antony is furious because he thought Cleopatra had escaped and retreated, but she defends herself by saying she was told he had died. She tells him about Octavian coming for them, on his way, and crossing Syria. The two get into a heated emotional discussion as she justified how she had to save Egypt and Caesarion from Octavian, the only things that mattered to her after Antony. At Cleopatra's court, Octavian's men arrive and offer a peaceful settlement in exchange for Antony. She refuses and claims that he can either have both Antony and her or none. Later Cleopatra confronts Antony again and professes her love, but Antony remains angry. Cleopatra talks to her guard Apollodorus, who confesses he has been secretly in love with her. Octavian demands Antony and Cleopatra be in Rome alive. Cleopatra bids her young son farewell as he leaves with the troops to stay safe from the suspected war and invasion by Octavian. Antony arrives at the battlefield, and along with Rufio, he plots the war against Octavian. As Antony wakes up from his sleep the following night, he comes out of his tent and realizes he has been abandoned and all his men have been killed. He is outnumbered by a sea of Octavian's army coming his way. He tries fighting them, but they refuse to even touch him, let alone kill him. Antony returns to Cleopatra and searches for her, but Apollodorus tells him that she will be found at the last possible place. This breaks Antony's heart, and he stabs himself in grief. Apollodorus takes the wounded Antony to the tomb where Cleopatra was hiding. Antony lays in Cleopatra's lap and professes his love as he takes his last breath and dies in her embrace with a kiss of death. Octavian arrives in Egypt and invades Cleopatra's palace. He finds Apollodorus dead after taking poison. He searches for Cleopatra and discovers that Antony, who he wanted alive, has died by her side. Octavian finally meets Cleopatra and offers her a deal, the Egyptian throne, in exchange for her forfeit. He asks her to give herself in and accept that her Egypt has been conquered. Octavian demands two things from Cleopatra: her presence in Rome to accompany him there, and her providing him with all the goods Egypt had. Cleopatra agrees in exchange for Caesarion's safety and to be given the throne of Egypt to him and his heirs. They both make a deal. As Octavian leaves, she demands a night to sleep alone and promises him she will not harm herself. After he leaves, Cleopatra writes a message for Octavian and prepares to leave for Rome, said to leave behind her handmaidens. She requests them to dress her in the gold outfit she wore the first time Antony laid his eyes on her upon her first arrival in Rome. Cleopatra asks for a basket of figs to eat, but secretly knows that there has been a poisonous snake hiding underneath the fruits. She purposely inserts her hand in the basket and is bitten by the snake. On the other hand, Octavian receives the message Cleopatra had written, stating that she wishes to be buried next to Antony. Octavian realizes Cleopatra is going to kill herself and rushes to her tomb. Upon reaching, he finds her lying dead gracefully in her gold outfit. The handmaidens had also died, bitten by the snake. The movie ends with the death of all three main characters of the love triangle: Caesar, Antony, and Cleopatra.